Hello and welcome to the Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week of coverage here on Monocle Radio. This week, we speak with Christophe Dubi, the Olympic Games Executive Director.
This immense popular success that we see today with stadiums absolutely crowded and the streets being crowded too. This is called managing success, right?
Plus, sensual perfumes.
It kind of really conjure up like a world which is very expansive and very emotional.
All that and much more in the next hour here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. As you might know, Monocle Radio has been reporting from Paris in the last 2 weeks at Maison Allianz. Allianz is a worldwide insurance partner of the Olympic and Paralympic Games. Among the many stellar guests we had the pleasure to speak with Christophe Dubi, the Olympic Games Executive Director.
We're midway through the second week, feeling better and better. Actually, we were in the elevator together with a few of the Allianz and NEO people, and I was asking, so how is it for you? Amazing was the answer. When I get this in an elevator, I take it every day.
So, I mean, you went in, I remember watching an interview with you at the beginning of the year in January saying we're extremely confident, these games are incredibly well designed, incredibly well delivered. I mean, that was in January. That was perhaps at a point where people were thinking, okay, how's Paris coping and how's Paris taking all this change? I mean, you needed to sort of like really puff your chest up at the beginning and sort of almost go on a campaign to bring people on side. Did it feel like that?
But you see, it's normal in a venture of this size, this degree of sophistication that people are asking questions. And yes, it's easy in planning times to point out to what can go wrong. And it's normal to do that. The system has to be pushed to what can go wrong. What goes well, no one will witness, but what can go wrong? From the media to civil society, we get these questions constantly. Thing is, when you take a little bit of a step back and we have delivered a few games over the last decades, not to that degree of audacious ideas and creativity, but nevertheless, in the main, if you take a step back and you were looking in January, what could go wrong? Yes, you had a few elements, but it was really, really well designed. The main concern that we always had from the final of the Champions League was the integration of security forces. It failed a few years ago for one game, and there we're speaking about 80 to 85 games equivalent every day. And from that moment in time, all efforts were on integration of planning, starting with security forces. And we knew for a long time that there was one person deciding at the end of the chain, and the rest was planning in an integrated fashion. So, we had all the markers being green. What we didn't anticipate, though, was this immense popular success that we see today with stadiums absolutely crowded and the streets being crowded too. This is called managing success, right?
What about the? It is lovely, and Paris feels special, and Paris feels different, and Paris feels as if it's in a very magical bubble for two weeks, and then we'll have the Paralympic Games after that. What about getting Parisians on side? Because that became one of the famous stories.
Yeah, I'm stunned about the behavior of the Parisians and the acceptance for games which are very disturbant, especially to the center of Paris, right? We had all the security measures prior to the opening ceremony and all these road closures throughout the day. I think one of the explanations why we have the support is that for many Parisians, the game started earlier and delivered goods, especially in Seine-Saint-Denis, but in the schools as well, in the sports club, right before the games, or I would say even a few years prior to the games. Before we're speaking about the legacy of the games, which is always the after 17 days. There they anticipated and delivered some of the programs prior to the games. And I think it really helped in the acceptance of all these measures that are constraints, But in the end, again, from businesses to citizens, they all came together.
Because this was a game that, as has been widely documented, takes place within a bustling, busy capital city, and people had to have their lives changed. You heard people's lives being disturbed, and roads being closed, etc., etc., etc. I mean, that is always going to be part of living in a capital. But we are now hearing reports that the Parisians who fled have been watching on the television, and some have come back. Do you wish they'd fallen in love a little earlier? Their own judgment. I love the fact, and I saw the same reporting that they intend to come back. It happens that I have a good friend of mine. Is a well-known French actor. He's Swiss, but he acts in France. He's away, and he wrote to me yesterday. And said, but I wish I would have stayed. Why didn't I stay? And yes, he's away and he's working, by the way, so he cannot make a comeback. But yes, it's true that I've read the same reports. And falling in love, is it early or late? Point is, when you fall in love, it's the right moment. So if it's now and not before, I'm okay with it. And the fact that we'll see more people in the streets and celebrating the athletes, especially for all these events that you can go and watch free of charge. You can go to the Champions Park. You will be able to witness the marathon this weekend. Some will participate in the marathon. So all these things that are available and free, including many of the cultural offering around, will be a very, very busy last 5 days. Tell me how you reconfigured the approach to hosting a games when you started to work with Paris, insofar as you've spoken in the past about how the way that the Olympics need to approach their role is that they must no longer make a city work with them. The Olympics must now work within a city. Tell me how you came to that conclusion and how that has borne out here in Paris.
Many examples in the past, and I could cite the development in Hellenico Airport in Athens. We still have scars from what happened there. Developments of venues which are never used for the sole purpose of the games. Bobsleigh track in Torino, not used. We can't have that anymore. The games have to adapt to a city and a region, not the reverse. And this is what you see here in Paris. Yes, they have built 2 venues because they're needed for the community long term. One is a multi-purpose hall, basketball mainly, and the second is a swimming pool, both, by the way, in Seine-Saint-Denis. And the villages in Seine-Saint-Denis as well, for the media and for the athletes. Why? Because this is a disfranchised community that need those venues. We could have built a temporary venue. We did it in London for basketball. You remember in the park? There we decided to go to Lille. And it makes sense to go to Lille because we had a fabulous venue there, right? Is it longer to go to Lille than something temporarily built in Paris? Yes. Does it change the experience starting from the athletes and for all of those than being in the venues or watching on TV? Absolutely not. Okay, and this is what we have done. In addition to simplifying all requirements. We don't need to have 3 stars restaurants across the Olympic Theatre. We can go with a sandwich and a salad when it makes sense. In the Champ de Mars, for example, where you have an offer next door to your hotel in Bercy, well, you have kitchen. Then you can have more elaborate menus. So this is the kind of things where we say, let's be as simple as we can. The games are complicated enough in their essence to simplify everything else that can be simplified. So Paris is a beautiful demonstration of how it can work.
And big news from the US this week. Kamala Harris introduced her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, at the biggest rally of her presidential campaign. Journalist Simon Marks joined us in the studio to discuss the Harris-Walz ticket and whether they can beat Donald Trump in November.
And make no mistake, violent crime was up under Donald Trump. That's not even counting the crimes he committed.
Simon, this was one aspect of Tim Walz. He obviously also introduced himself. Kamala Harris introduced him as well. Bit of a attack dog. He had quite a few sort of really spiky lines in his speech. What did you make of his performance?
I thought it was astonishing, and astonishing in the context, Chris, of the fact that so many people were surprised by his selection. We knew this was coming down to the last two, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. And of course, the fact that the event had been booked to take place in Philadelphia led so many political observers, myself included, to think it's got to be Josh Shapiro. And then there was this surprise announcement that it is going to be Tim Walz. And once you saw the two of them on the stage there yesterday, throughout that rally,
made sense,
immediately it made sense. I mean, the chemistry between them playing out yesterday, if they can replicate that through the Democratic Party's convention, which is coming up the week after next in Chicago, and then for the remainder of this election campaign, they will feel very confident. And Kamala Harris, after that rally, put out a fundraising message. I mean, a fundraising message was put out in her name. And the subject line of that email simply reads, Tim Walz, leader, fighter, patriot. And that is absolutely how they are characterizing him, and that is exactly how he presented himself yesterday.
Well, and he is also, you could argue, straight out of central casting, frankly, with this mix that he has. Geography teacher, football coach, veteran as well, then turned congressman and governor of Minnesota, but also just the way he speaks. He's, of course, famously the architect, if you will, of this line calling Donald Trump and J.D. Vance simply weird,
yes,
which has taken on so much. And I think what I was curious to get your take on is just this sort of levity that he brings. Do we get the sense that this is one of the ways the Democrats now hope to defeat Donald Trump? Have they been too doomsday about all of this? This is one of the arguments, even though this is, of course, a serious campaign about threats to democracy and the like. He's kind of taking a different tact on approaching that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to underscore that vice presidential choices rarely affect the outcome of elections, unless, of course, you pick the wrong nominee. I mean, Sarah Palin,
but he's changing
John
the
McCain.
entire rhetoric of the campaign as well.
He is changing absolutely the pattern of this campaign. And there are two contrasts that are being drawn. There's the contrast between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, right, and Tim Walz and Joe Biden, the Democratic Party suddenly realizing that not only was a pressure gauge opened when Joe Biden dropped out of the race, but that all of the conversations that were taking place a year ago, Nancy Pelosi and others saying we can't have a competitive primary, Joe Biden, we've got to rally around him. I mean, with hindsight, Democrats at the grassroots must now be recognizing that that was crazy, that you could absolutely have charted this transition earlier. But the other contrast is absolutely between the team of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Donald Trump has lost his way since that Republican convention in Milwaukee. He seems to have been absolutely blindsided almost by Biden's decision to leave the race. And J.D. Vance, as we know, has stumbled in the early moments of his status as Donald Trump's running mate, to the point where Donald Trump has sort of indicated, I mean, that there might be a bit of buyer's remorse on his part about the choice that he's made. So if they can keep this up, if they can find that magic, Harris and Walz working together, Trump and J.D. Vance, the onus now is on them to find a way of responding. And also, finally, I mean, as you were saying earlier, who doesn't love in middle America a high school football coach? I mean, the resume is just like absolutely perfect for the task that he's been brought in to achieve, which is to turn that vote out for Kamala Harris and himself now in the Midwest.
It is also interesting, as you talk there about these fears of a transition that existed before Biden's decision. This could have gone another way in that there would have been a campaign for a new candidate. And you can almost imagine now how that might have gone if someone like Tim Walz had also gotten involved. And in that context, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, this whole vice presidential decision has almost felt like a little mini campaign in itself. Yeah. And in that sense, a word on Josh Shapiro, because he was the sort of, potential vice presidential pick. And I do wonder if there is any internal democratic debate about Gaza also being settled with this that will remain a sore spot. He was going to be the first Jewish vice presidential candidate. This is something that Republicans are picking up on.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a sore spot that's going to linger for the Democrats, because in a sense, one of the most important things that happened yesterday was that Josh Shapiro was on the stage there in Pennsylvania, absolutely indicating that he is committed to doing the job that Kamala Harris wanted him to do if she had put him on the ticket. Bring Pennsylvania home. He's insanely popular there. He has never called for a surrender in Gaza by the Israeli military, for a ceasefire rather, in Gaza by the Israeli military. That was, and the Palestinian forces, Hamas. That was going to be problematic for the ticket as Kamala Harris tries to turn around a pretty beleaguered situation for Democrats in Michigan, a critical state. Tim Walz, by contrast, has the capacity to try and reach out, Kamala Harris believes, to core counties in 4 states, his own state, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa and Wisconsin, that voted twice for Barack Obama, but in 2016 voted for Donald Trump. And the Democrats, absolutely want to bring those voters home. And they think, Kamala Harris thinks, that Tim Walz has broader appeal in those counties because of his roots in Minnesota than Josh Shapiro necessarily would have had coming as he does from Pennsylvania. I think that the Middle Eastern issue was an element to her decision-making, but ultimately she's got him on side anyway, and she hopes that he will deliver Pennsylvania. If they win in November, all of this will be considered, a masterstroke. If they lose in November to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, the recriminations are going to get very ugly.
Well, finally, Simon, just to that point of whether they will win or lose, it is easy in these moments as either media or just among Democrats to kind of get carried away in this giant show of Democratic unity and enthusiasm that we are seeing. That said, the polls have not moved that much. They are showing maybe now Kamala Harris with a slight edge where Joe Biden, by comparison, was behind Donald Trump. Do you really get the sense that the public is going to buy into this brand new Democratic unity and Democratic ticket?
The Republicans are going to hammer away. They are already hammering away on the notion that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because he's a darling of the progressive left wing of the Democratic Party, are so far left that they've left America. There were emails going out from the Trump campaign yesterday saying, in the words of one, quoting Donald Trump, Governor Tim Walz is going to unleash hell on earth. They say that they want to replicate what's been going on in California, all of the left-wing policies that they ascribe to Governor Gavin Newsom, and bring it to the national stage. So that's going to be the strategy. And I think it's important to remember that on the day that Joe Biden dropped out of the race, Joe Biden's approval rating was 38.5%. Kamala Harris's approval rating was 38.6%. So the turnaround has to be for longer than just a couple of weeks. And, through the Democratic National Convention, they've got a big sales job to do between now and November the 5th. The polling at the moment indicates that they may have started that quest, but there's a big mountain to climb before Democrats can begin to think that this is a safe election for them.
You are listening to The Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Another highlight from our guests in Paris is Glenn Keane. We explore sports and film with the legendary animator.
Just being here for the games has been like a feast for an artist's eye. Everywhere I go, I bring my sketchbook.
Have you got it with you this morning?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah.
We may need to get out and do some drawing before you go. Might put you on the spot there. So it's a feast for an artist. I mean, what is it that you see that we don't?
Movement, desire. I was taught by my mentor, Ollie Johnston, who, with Walt Disney, they created the look of Disney animation. And he would say, he was an old guy when he was teaching me, Glenn, don't draw what the character is doing. Draw what they're thinking and feeling. And I think that's what I try to capture when I'm drawing. When I was working on Dear Basketball with Kobe, I said, Kobe, for one thing, you've got the worst basketball player on earth animating you. And he says, well, that's good because everything you're going to learn about basketball is going to be studying him. And I said, yeah, you're right. But look, I've downloaded your top 20 plays, and I need you to tell me what you were thinking and feeling in each one of these moments for me to understand how to animate you. And he's just had this photographic memory of every feeling and stories, and it was incredible. So when I'm sitting, like last night, I was sketching the France-Germany basketball game, and I mean, I've never seen such a physical basketball game. I mean, and the drawing I did is these two players pushing against each shoulder, both driving, fighting one another. I mean, there's such drama in this. I mean, as an animator, you're a storyteller, but you do that in your drawing.
And what's interesting there is actually the slight disadvantage of radio is that we could not see that when you were describing the France-Germany basketball match, your body actually took the form of a visceral fighting man. It was astonishing to see. What I quite want to do is take you back. And when you see Dear Basketball, this utterly beautiful short film about what drives Kobe Bryant, you illustrate at the top that this little boy who's on his bed and he's using his rolled up socks for a ball, and that's what lights his fire. What's Glenn Keane's rolled up socks moment?
Well, I never remember anything other than wanting to be an artist. I mean, that was what I'd always desired. My dad was a cartoonist. But I knew somehow I wasn't going to be a cartoonist like him. I wanted to be a fine artist. Because one day my dad, when I was like about 7 years old, he said, Glenn, I'm a cartoonist. You're an artist. And it was like being knighted. He gave me a book on dynamic anatomy, and I started drawing the Olympic athletes in that were like the sculptures from Greece. And I was doing these drawings of a discus thrower and a javelin and a sprinter. And I remember getting on the school bus, and I had my sketchbook with me. And all my friends gathered around and were looking at my sketches, and they started laughing. And they said, hey, Keane's drawing naked guys. And you know, at that age, when your friends laugh at what you do, you stop doing it. But because my dad had said, Glenn, you're an artist, it was like, I realized they don't get it. I'm special. I like being an artist. And it just fueled my path. I mean, that was my rolled up socks moment for me.
How much of what you have just described to us is playing out now at the Olympics, where you see athletes with the javelin, with the discus, that moment when the body is at its most extreme and it's most, or arguably its most beautiful?
I think that there's something inside of the human spirit that animates the body. I mean, an animator is somebody who is animating what is inside and is coming out. And the body does impossible, incredible things. I think the key to anything you do is thinking like a child. You just never stop that. Successful athletes, I believe, still think like a child. Children believe that the impossible is possible. And there's nothing better at the end of a game when there is no time left and you still see the fire in the eyes, like, we're not going to give up. I mean, this is the spirit of a child living in an athlete. And I saw that with Kobe. I saw that in the team last night watching that. It's so thrilling.
And how much of that thinking like a child was stitched through your work at Disney? The fact remains is that you were creating beautiful films and beautiful characters essentially for children, although we all know that quite a few more people watch it. But how much every day did you have to say, I'm getting up, I have to think like a child, I have to think like a child.
No, I don't ever think that. It's just the way I am. I mean, you become the character that you animate. Ariel, for example, I created designing and animating her. I was 33 years old, and I remember animating Ariel singing this song, Part of Your World, as she's swimming up, and she's starting to reach for the land. And I thought, this is embarrassing. I'm a 16-year-old mermaid right now, and I'm animating
incredibly pretty 16-year-old mermaid as well.
And I thought, oh gosh, what are people going to think of me? But I couldn't stop Ariel. She swam up and she reached out, and as she's singing Part of Your World, she drifts back down to the bottom of the sea, and it's just desire. And so I animated it, and years later, I was speaking at an animation school, and this young woman comes up to me and said, Mr. Keane, I don't know if you remember this, there's this moment in Little Mermaid where Ariel reaches out, and I said, oh, yeah, no, I remember that. She said, well, I was 4 years old, and I was in the movie theater, and when Ariel reached out and singing this song, Part of Your World, she said, I stood up in the middle of the movie theater, and I reached my hands out to take her hands because she wanted to be part of my world. I was like, thank you, I could kiss you. This is what you want. You want to connect. You want to touch the audience and have them believe, like you do, in the character.
And it's summer. We have a highlight from the Manual Food and Drink show, and this time we head to two leading kitchens on the island of Sifnos, Cantina and Bostani Bar and Restaurant, to learn more about the archipelago's gastronomic innovations.
The Cycladic island of Sifnos has many strings to its bow. It's relaxed, laid back, and has fantastic beaches, plenty of fascinating monasteries, and some old-school fishing villages. It's small, easily traversable, and yet surprising in its landscape, but where this island really has an edge compared to its other Greek counterparts is in its gastronomy. Of course, plenty of restaurants across the archipelago are trying to move things on from traditional taverna fare, but few places have the concentration of truly exciting eateries that Sifnos does. Among those leading the pack, in the little harbour underneath the ancient walled citadel of Castro, is Cantina. Run by Georgios Samoilis, this restaurant may consist of little more than a bohemian terrace with a view out to sea, with its name scrawled on the side of a low, whitewashed hut, but the food coming out of the kitchen is nothing short of phenomenal. I caught up with Samoilis to find out more.
Cantina started in the pandemic summer of 2020, and after having spent a good 10 years in the island working with local producers and building a really strong network with them, the idea behind it was to create a restaurant where most of the ingredients used in the kitchen would come from the island, and at the same time trying to reduce our waste.
However, Sifnos had a bit of a gastronomic pedigree even before this new generation of restaurants started shaking things up on the island. And it's not just because of agricultural production of ingredients, though there is some of that too. One of Sifnos' most famous former residents, Tselementes, had a nationwide influence in shaping Greek cuisine, and these shores were historically home to plenty more cooks.
The island is very famous for chickpeas, the local, goat cheese, fish, of course, we are an island, but working closely with elder farmers and producers, we have managed throughout these years to recover some other very interesting seeds when it comes to vegetables or legumes, these kind of things. The truth is that Greece is a marine nation. For many, many years, many Greeks have been employed into this huge global industry. And Sifnos had the tradition of providing all these boats with cooks. Then the most famous, in past times, chef came from this island. So it was actually the first Greek chef that was trained the French way, so more international, and he tried to translate, if you like, traditional Greek recipes into the modern French language of a kitchen. His name is Tselementes, and he nowadays, any kind of cookbook, popularly people will call it by his name, Tselementes. So Tselementes is the same as a cookbook. So this is what created a long tradition for Sifnos, and for sure for the past 15 years, new restaurants with new ideas, new modern Greek cuisine has been a big thing in Sifnos. And, because it's a place where for 6 months it turns very international and you get people from all around the world coming, looking for good food, good wines. As professionals, we have this amazing opportunity to open this dialogue and reintroduce modern Greek cuisine.
As for Samoilis himself, he didn't have much of a background in the food industry before moving to Sifnos. Though his mother's family was from the island and he used to come here on holiday every summer, he used to work in Athens as a scientist specializing in molecular biology. Choosing this career gave him a chance for a radical change of lifestyle and to indulge his passion for hosting people, all the while helping create positive change and redistributing wealth on the island, though this doesn't come without its challenges.
Cantina is super unique. It's a very, very demanding, difficult project from so many different aspects, and it has been really hard at the beginning. Every year we are more mature and more experienced, and it becomes slightly easier to cope with, starting from the fact that there's no direct access by road. There are like 100 steps separating us from the closest point where you can bring your car and carry everyday goods. So there's a lot of carrying up and down the steps, a lot of things to think and work out. The most important thing is that we are in direct cooperation with so many local farmers, animal keepers, fishermen. Everybody gives their goods to Cantina to cook with. So every day the menu changes, and every day you can get an actual picture of what is going on the island produce-wise. This is very special for us. It is very special for the locals, because they do feel that they take part into it, they're part of it, and they're very proud to say that, their produce is all being taken into Cantina. And, if I may say, it is a bit of a even political, economical act, because new money is coming into the island through the restaurant from tourists, and this is redistributed into the local community, taking out as much as we can the middleman. So it is very important. It's a big thing for the local society, and this is what makes it special also for its guests.
Those ingredients really sing in all of the dishes on Cantina's menu, which changes frequently, though there are certain mainstays that have rightly been staples from day one and that represent perfectly the kitchen's approach to things.
Our cellar, our pantry and cellar is like, it's our lab from where every day we pick our condiments to use on local ingredients. An iconic dish is the chickpea panis. It may remind you of polenta, for example. Mm-hmm. So we're in the island of chickpeas, and we paid honor our way to this lovely ingredient. Another one that I particularly love, and it has been a signature dish for Cantina since day one, is the fish kebab. So we make like a fish kebab, and we wrap it in lamb's caul, and we grill it, caul fat. So it's a nice surf and turf, unexpected. And then all the weeds that we use to slow cook and make them a little bit spicy, these kind of things.
Of course, Cantina is not the only restaurant bringing a fresh take on the island's cuisine. A little further north on the island, on a high terrace that looks out to the big blue of the Mediterranean, as part of the wonderful Verina Astra Hotel, Bostani is trying out an approach that's more rooted in bistronomy. The restaurant name, which means orchard, gives a good clue as to where a lot of the ingredients that end up on the plate are harvested from, but there's plenty more that went into setting its philosophy, as Verina Astra's food and beverage manager Yannis Arvanitis explains.
The idea was the Greek cuisine in another way, a little bit more sophisticated, but of course without being glamorous. We were trying to frame the Greek cuisine and especially the Cyclades, but of course we don't have problem to use products from all over the world. First of all, we're trying to use everything that our Bostani gives us. Then we have small producers at the island that gives us not only vegetables, but also, for example, the fishes. For sure, we are on an island.
Even though the island's historical agricultural bounty and renowned chef Tselementes gave Sifnos the beginnings of its gastronomic reputation, Arvanitis pinpoints the moment when matters really shifted in food terms on the island to the opening of Omega-3. This fish restaurant, where both he and Cantina's Georgios Samoilis used to work, changed the pace for the scene, though Bostani nowadays is striking its own course.
The last 10 years, I have to say, to be honest, after Omega-3, it was the first restaurant that was outside of the box in Sifnos. So Omega-3 put on the gastronomic map this island. And then after that, A lot of efforts appear every year, and I think this is the future of Sifnos, gastronomy. We're doing totally our thing. First of all, I think that, for example, the other restaurants, they use products for all over the world. They're doing, for example, Peruvian kitchen, Latin America generally kitchen, or other restaurants, Greek cuisine, more elevated. I think that we are the only restaurant that we do bistronomy with sophisticated Greek cuisine on the island.
That sophistication and innovative spirit is evident on the menu, which Arvanitis is all too happy to suggest highlights from, starting with a very special salad.
We call it tomatoes and strawberries, and in fact is an elevated Greek traditional salad. Of course, it's totally a twist. We add some strawberries that the Greek salad has not. The cucumber that always a Greek salad has is a sorbet. The olives is a tuile, a biscuit. And instead of feta cheese that we usually add in the Greek salad, we have the goat cheese aromatized with mastica. And then from the warm plates, I love the goat. The goat is from the island. Unfortunately, this island is not like, for example, Naxos that has a lot of things, animals, potatoes, vegetables, a lot of things. Sifnos product capers, amazing honey, goats, rabbits. So what we're doing, we're taking the goat, half of the goat of the whole animal, in a big casserole, and it's really slow cooked in the oven. Then everything is pulled, and we serve it with seasoned greens and green peppercorns. And on the side, some labne. Labne is similar with galotiri. Galotiri is the Greek style, and is a cream based on yogurt.
Interestingly, for a restaurant that's so focused on reinterpreting Greek classics, Bostani and its manager are not afraid to recognize that influences in any cuisine come from far and wide, and that in an island kitchen, as in many kitchens besides, there are some ingredients that you may have to source from further afield.
Greece were occupied by Turkish for 400 years, so we have a lot of influence, you have to be honest. And it's not bad, it's nice. Then Lebanese, have you ever been to a Lebanese restaurant? So similar to the Greek cuisine, with more spices. So we decided that, okay, we don't have to feel guilty if we use something outside of Greece. Doesn't matter. The thing is that we want to give, for example, a nice plate that is Greek, even if we use some products outside of Greece.
Tradition is there to play with, and in Sifnos, restaurants are doing an excellent job of it. For Monocle in Sifnos, I am Chiara Rimella.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
You are listening to The Curator, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. And this week I had a very special guest. It's a singer that I very much admire, and her music is being kind of revived. She's of the city pop genre. It is, of course, the Japanese singer Penny Toriyama. Let's have a listen to my chat with her.
Have you heard city pops? They call it. Yeah. I think it's a city pop boom right now. Like from the 80s, the Japanese singers, 80s music. It's kind of hit all over the world. So probably that's why my music was recorded on 80s. So, it's part of a city pop music. So I guess that's why they start to get to know me again,
How would you describe city pop for people that perhaps are not experts?
I can't explain because I've been singing pop songs all over, all my life. So they just put city in the beginning. So, there's nothing changed, I think.
And you mentioned Columbia Records because when you go, Tower Records in Tokyo, there's plenty of city pop compilations and your albums were there. It's very interesting, right? Because there's more attention to that sometimes than to the kind of the newer music as well.
I know. Oh, yeah, I guess like I said before, it's because it's a city pop's boom. So I guess my music is, it's in a top city pop. So I guess the Columbia wanted to release, but it's all digital. They renewed it. They remastered the album. So I think you can hear it more, nicely, I guess. And I don't know why, but I'm thankful because, they released so many albums and and it's for the new people, like old fans, they have my albums, but some of the new fans I started to get new fans. So I'm glad.
Yes, I do have the physical copies of some of your albums as well, including Sexy Robot, which is one of my favorites. Penny, I just want to know, tell me more, what are you doing with music these days? You just mentioned that you came back from tour, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about some of your recent projects and about this tour as well.
Recent is that March 6th, from Colombia, my new best CD was released. And I guess that was the first this year, the show Good Thing. And then from May, they wanted to the China. They wanted to invite me, for live concert, and we went from 4 days. I had a concert in Blue Note Shanghai and Blue Note Beijing, and Koshu. It's a live house called Mao. And I was surprised because we were surprised. Not only me, but my Colombia was surprised too, because the ticket was sold out in 2 minutes.
Wow. That's impressive.
And it's 600 people, and the 600 people, so it was, but the China tour was only for 2 days. But since the tickets was sold in Beijing and Shanghai and the other places, so they offered another 2 days. And I was surprised because all the fans were young, very young, and they all sing together. They know the lyrics and the music, so it's kind of pressure, I can't make mistake. But it was sort of like that. It was really great. And like you mentioned, Sexy Robot, right? In Sexy Robot, there's a song called Kathy. I think that the song Kathy was a kind of break in China. A lot of people covers it in YouTubes and stuff like that. So I guess that's why they got to know me, and they wanted to, invite me to the concert. So it was really great.
And you mentioned China there. So basically this thing about your music and perhaps a little bit of city pop, I feel that in Europe as well, maybe in the United States where you are right now, so it's not something that is just in Japan. I think people are becoming more interested in this kind of music too. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, they ask me so much same questions like that because they say why, I think because on the 80s in Japan, they had so much money, the bubbles was, yeah. And so they put so many, time and a lot of money to record, like it was all, like a bassman was there, and, it's not like PC, like, I don't know how to explain it, it was, I guess that's why the sound is kind of, very new and nice.
Optimistic
but after
as
90s,
well.
Yeah. After 90s, the Japan was kind of, the recording was kind of, down. So I guess from 80 to first of 90s, they put so much effort in the recording. So I guess that's why the sound is so good. That's why maybe, after so many years, they like the sound. I don't know, but I guess that's something like that, I guess.
What do you listen to music these days? What inspires you musically?
Oh, I was inspired in soul music, like Motown and physical when I was small, and I guess that's my root for the music. I still like soul music, but recently I'm into jazz, standard jazz, I never sang jazz, so I'm kind of interested putting my jazz taste in a new music that I want to make. I think something like that. And mostly I listen to my songs because I have so many concerts and live. I have to learn the words and the music, so mostly I listen to my songs.
Give me some of your favorite songs because I have a little list here. I love, sorry, I mentioned many times Sexy Robot, Exotic Yokogao. I think it's funky.
Yeah.
What is it about, actually, Exotic Yokogao? I think it's so funky. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it was in the Next Door album. That was in Next Door album. I think it was the third album. We wanted to do disco sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's why Exotic Yokogao is supposed to be like a disco song, and having fun and stuff like that. I guess that's why everybody likes it. I don't know.
No, it's a great song. So tell me, Penny, it's so exciting that you're still performing. What are your plans for the rest of the year or next year? Is there anything you can review in terms of
next
concerts?
year? I'm going to China tour again. Yeah, so I guess that's kind of exciting for me. And I do mostly lives, cover live and my original lives, and I do radio program. I have radio program, and I still write lyrics, and I guess I'm going to music. But my hobby, or I'm learning flamenco dance right now.
Amazing.
And I do Tai Chi for Tai Chi for health. I have to take care of myself, so I like to move around. So I guess that's mostly I'm walking, taking a walk and stuff like that, I guess.
That's fantastic. And listen, you did mention a radio show. Where can people go to actually listen to some of the shows? Because I think they will be very curious.
It's live, so I guess it's not recorded. So I guess it's like one time. It's in Tokyo. It's called Komae, the Komae station. It's near there, Komae FM. I do a music program, and I bring a lot of guests, and I play my song, and there a lot of songs that I like, and I love radio.
The world of fragrance often takes inspiration from unusual places, but how do you bottle the transcendent escapism of erotic literature? Well, Joassin's endeavors to do just that. Its first 3 scents were inspired by French authors from the 20th century, Anaïs Nin, Catherine Millet, and Pauline Réage. We meet founder Cherry Chang.
So I've always really been interested in literature, and in both in sense of smell. I think the difference between perfume and literature is that perfume really hits us very instantaneously, and it really sort of involves our body. Like I spend a lot of time reading myself, a lot of time theory, but also fiction. And for me, I think after I spend a lot of time reading, I feel a bit separated from my body, and this kind of experience about just really abstract thought and also sort of feeling disembodied, not really connected. Whereas I think for me, what perfume or like any scented objects does for me is whenever I experience them, sniff them, it really instantaneously bring me back to my body. And it kind of really conjure up like a world which is very expansive and very emotional, which is what literature tries to achieve as well. But I just think it hits us on a very different level. And I think both could work really interestingly to co-create a universe. Jouissance, this word came from Elena Cixous, who's a French literary theorist and writer. So she's really amazingly published this essay in 1975. It's called The Laugh of Medusa. Can she use this term jouissance, which in French just means like orgasm, and means like woman's ability to experience surplus pleasure erotically, but she's linking this idea to woman's creative power and creative prolificity. So in her writing, Cixous really encouraged female writers and women artists in general to explore kind of the dark undercurrents of desires and not be conditioned by a language that's already sort of very simplified and exists but doesn't really reflect their true experience. Which is why we choose 3 authors that are kind of controversial even in sort of the contemporary setting. So I could start with probably the most well-known one, which is Anais Nin. She's definitely highly controversial because not only, I think, from her personal biography, she lived this very adventurous life. She's married on both continents at the same time. And she very infamously kept this diary, which kind of chronicled over 6 decades of her different experience with artists, writers, and her own kind of sexual desires. Really, I think I find interesting is her contribution, because her work was published much later, even though a lot of the stuff she has written in the 30s, 40s. But then it was only until the 70s she was really reappraised feminist and like serious literary academia.
What's the process like when you kind of decided on her as a figure, and you've obviously done a lot of research into her writing and her as a figure? How do you then bottle that as a scent? What does that journey look like?
So I think Anais Nin, because she's so prolific and her most well-known work, Doubt of Venus, has actually already been made into perfume. So we decided to take a very different approach to her work and decided to choose a work by her which is a bit less well-known. But also we decided to focus more on her diaries, which is more, in my opinion, is more kind of representative of who she is as a creative. Basically, for this perfume, La Carrière Secret, we decided to focus on the first volume of her diary, which is written between 1931 to 1934, which kind of chronicles her life when she was living in Paris with her husband. But she had this really interesting engagement with the American writer Henry Miller and his wife June Mansfield. So we looked for kind of different little details from the work itself to see if there's any kind of evocation of like sense and word, kind of just different little notes we can evoke in our composition in the perfume. But we also kind of took a more overall holistic approach to just look at really famous sort of iconic scents from the time, which is like a lot of the Guerlain perfumes will serve as a very good inspiration for us. For example, with the addition of cumin in this composition, we really took reference to the fact that one of Anais Nin's favorite perfume, Monocle, it had a very interesting use of a spicy note. And we also looked into Narcisse Noir Cajon, which is another Anais Nin's favorite perfume. So we kind of referenced them, but we are now really creating something exactly the same.
You are with The Curator, a weekly highlight show here on Monocle Radio. And finally on the show, Kate Campbell represented Australia at 4 Olympic Games and won 8 medals, 4 gold, 1 silver, 3 bronze. She talked to Monocle Radio's team of correspondents in Paris about the bittersweet feeling of being a spectator and how a healthy dose of trash talking can be good for sport.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting coming to an Olympic Games as a spectator for the first time. This is the first time that I've watched an Olympic Games since 2004. So I've competed at the past 4 Olympics. So the last time I sat down and watched an Olympics, it was in Athens. And now here I am on the other side. And I have to tell you, it is so wonderful to be able to see the other side, because when you're an athlete, you're so focused and you live in the Olympic Village and at your competition venue. And that's pretty much it. Whereas here, I'm staying in the heart of Paris and I get to see the city come alive. I get to see how excited everyone is. I get to see all the friends and families of all the athletes coming in to support them, and the real buzz and anticipation that comes along with being in a city that's hosting an Olympic Games. And so it has been a little bit bittersweet. You know, there have definitely been times where I've been at the pool and wished that I was on the other side of the barrier and standing behind the starting blocks, but being able to be in the crowd and cheer on our incredible athletes has been a pretty good consolation prize.
A thing I have always wondered, as somebody who has watched a lot of sport and was absolutely never any good at any of it, is when you've been absolutely very good at it and then you're watching it again, do you think you watch a swimming race differently from how anybody watching the games would watch it? Are you seeing things the rest of us aren't? And if so, are there ways you can explain what they are?
That's a really interesting question. And I would say that yes, because of my many, many years in the sport, I can look at a swimmer and I can tell if they're on, if they're off, if they're starting to hurt, or if they're managing to maintain their pace and their stroke rate. So all of those things, because I I'm very used to watching swimming, I can do. It's the same as a tennis commentator who is watching a tennis match and can tell me exactly where Roger Federer went wrong. Not that he was wrong very often, but, you know, they can pick up these little intricacies and explain them to us. So, yes, I can see it a little bit, but I have had the absolute joy of not having to critique people's events. I have just had the joy of sitting in the stands and watching, and I'm doing a little bit of work with our host broadcaster back in Australia, but my job is to review the final session and recap all the incredible events and sort of highlight all our athletes. So I've been able just to sit back and enjoy the show.
You have, however, managed to insert yourself into the Olympic discourse. You and Michael Phelps have been trading a certain amount of, let's call it badinage, via social media. You have said, and I think you're right, and I have always thought this, that there is nothing wrong with a little bit of trash talk from time to time. Do you think the Olympics and the Olympian ideal that it tries to present does get a little bit prissy about that?
Oh, yes. And look, I think that Australian sense of humour is quite different to American sense of humour, which I had a very...
So I've been frequently informed.
Very steep learning curve in. Apparently they don't get irony and they're very sincere. And so things that are said in jest can often be misconstrued. They're also intensely patriotic, and apparently where I really went wrong was talking about the Star-Spangled Banner and their national anthem. Now, I admit that it is a great anthem. However, you know, I come from Australia. Our national anthem, Advance Australia Fair, has probably one of the least sexy words in the English language, girt, in it. Our land is girt. It means surrounded.
I think it's also the only context in which that word ever appears.
100%. Like, no one would ever use that. So I can, like, laugh at our national anthem and still be intensely proud to sing it on top of the podium and still intensely proud of being Australian. However, that didn't translate very well in terms of America. And I do think, though, that our sport is built on rivalries. The Olympic Games is built on rivalries and it's built on competition. It's how we get the best out of ourselves. It's how we push each other and ourselves to our limits. And Australia and the USA has been going toe to toe for many, many years. And they just pipped us at the post in the pool, coming out with 8 gold medals to our 7. But that happened on the final night of competition, and it kept everyone hanging on every race, because it was like, is this the one that America is going to win and overtake Australia? Because we started out really strong. So it's all in good faith. It's all in good fun. I've reached out to Michael Phelps personally and made sure that there was no beef, and he completely agrees. And I think that it's been a great thing for the sport all round.
Was it always important to you coming up personally, whether as an individual swimmer or part of a team, to have a rival, perhaps even a nemesis?
No. For me, it was about how do I execute my best race to the best of my ability. It wasn't necessarily about beating someone else. It was about beating myself and beating what I had done in the past. And so I think that some people really thrive on those rivalries. I think that the way that the American culture is set up is that they really thrive on those rivalries. You know, Michael Phelps used to read every news article that was ever written about him. And if someone said something negative, he would print it out and he would stick it on his wall and he would use that as motivation. So for some people, that's how they get out of bed in the morning and how they stay motivated. But that was never for me. I think I'm too lazy to hold a grudge. Like, honestly, training's hard enough. I can't be bothered to hold a grudge and remember what everyone said about me and try and prove them wrong.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you very much for listening.